focusing on education in all agree that education is the key, that we'll see that many other sustainable development goals are achieved because education helps people to actually reach and reduce inequalities and also reach gender equality because people are able to make informed discussions and decisions. Now, this virtual national dialogue is held under the theme Education in Emergency amidst COVID-19, and we want to understand the role of the host communities in fostering resilience, diversity and coexistence for better education outcomes. Now, this dialogue is contributing to the ongoing education response plan that is premised on setting out a realistic and implementable plan to ensure improved learning outcomes for the increasing numbers of refugees and the host community children and of course the adolescents across the country. Remember that we all want to move ahead without leaving anyone behind. It is the ultimate goal. So for the next 1 hour we are going to have 2 segments in this dialogue. We'll have some opening remarks and of course some panel discussions, but first a very big thank you to our sponsors, Oxfam Bryce project in Uganda, supported by the European Union, the Education Advocacy with the Difference platform. Thank you so much for organizing this talk show. I want to immediately dive into this conversation by inviting Mr. Patrick Kaboyo, who is online, and he is the technical advisor at the Education Advocacy Network. He is going to help us understand why we're here having this dialogue, talking about refugees, the host communities. We want to understand why do we have to have this conversation at this time. We know that COVID-19 has clearly affected different sectors of the economy, and of course the education sector has highly been affected. Right now we are talking about vaccines, seeing that our children, the students get vaccinated and also the teachers get vaccinated in order to see, of course, the education sector move ahead. So this is a discussion that we're going to have, and we are waiting to hear from Mr. Patrick Kaboyo, who is going to help us and set the pace for this discussion. But also in our studios we do have Honorable Dr. Joyce Moriku Kaduchu, who is the State Minister in charge of primary education, and I do want to thank you so much for creating time to be part of this conversation. And our chief guest is already in our studios, Honorable Chris Abadiomosi, who is the Minister of ICT. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing your remarks in regards to today's topic.
Thank you very much, and thank you, viewers.
We also have Mr. Godfrey Byarhanga, who's joining us, and he will be helping us understand in the Department of Refugees at the Office of the Prime Minister, what are they currently doing to address the issues to do with refugees and ensuring that they too actually access education facilities in this country the same way the host communities are receiving the same without affecting any category. Now, once again, I do want to invite Mr. Patrick Kaboyo, who's the technical advisor at the Education Advocacy Network, to give us his remarks. But since he's joining us on Zoom, we are not able to actually get him right away. But allow me to immediately just go to Mr. Byarhanga Godfrey to help us understand this topic and to give us his perspective when we talk about host communities and refugees and the theme today. What does it mean to you, sir?
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. I think the topic is very broad.
Yes.
And to start with, education in emergency. Amidst COVID-19 challenges, for me that's where I start with posing a lot of questions. Did we have education in emergency during COVID-19? The answer to a bigger extent is no. Because remember, at the peak, all our borders were closed to asylum seekers to reduce on the transmission of COVID-19. Our reception centers were closed, our transit centers were closed, and this is where we normally have education in emergency. And that was followed, of course, with closure of schools. So to a bigger extent, from last year, 2020 to date, we will not exercise that education in emergency. However, we are planning now, waiting for the time when schools will open, and when the borders are open officially, the asylum space is open, our transit centers are open, and reception centers are open. So that's, I think, why I wanted to pose a question, education in emergency amidst COVID-19.
True.
Nonetheless, when you go into the more details of the theme, look at the host community, the role of the host community. And I think the host community plays a very big role. I know my honorable ministers will make statements, and you will see what these host communities have contributed to the lives of refugees, not only in education, but almost in every other aspect. But in education, remember that we have integrated schools. We do not have specific schools for refugees and specific schools for nationals. Within those communities, these children are mixed. We call them integrated schools. And that is a very, very big contribution from the host community. Use the same curriculum, same teachers, and the qualifications you get are the same. In some countries, it may not be the case. So for us, with this integrated system and the settlement approach, we think the host community is contributing a lot and making our refugees more resilient.
Thank you so much, Mr. Godfrey Byarhanga, who's the Senior Field Coordinator in the Department of Refugees in the Office of the Prime Minister. Do allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to invite Honorable Dr. Joyce Muriku Kaduchu, who is the State Minister in charge of primary education. Honorable, with this background that we've just received from Mr. Godfrey Byarhanga, what are your main remarks when you see the theme today? What are those thoughts that come to you as the State Minister in charge of primary education? We've seen COVID-19 affect different sectors, but the education sector has clearly been affected. And we know that information allows people to make informed decisions. What are your thoughts on today's theme?
Thank you so much. I really want to thank you that has brought on board this very important discussion. As we all know, education is a very important tool for socio-economic transformation. And for us to reach middle income as a nation, we need human capital development that is achieved through education sector. And this has come rightly at the time that we are reflecting on the education sector. Where have we been? Where are we now? And where are we going with the COVID-19 pandemic? Now, indeed it is true, COVID has disrupted the normal traditional learning in classroom, but that has never stopped the learning process during this COVID period. And it has made us to come up with different innovative ways to enable our children learn. And that is why innovation that has come on board in the education sector, chaired by the spearheaded by our minister, the First Lady, and the Minister of Education and Sports, we brought on board on learning, we brought on board home learning materials, we brought on board learning through media, television, radio, and even digital learning. And that enabled our children to be able to learn. Even classrooms were closed, but learning was ongoing. That was why the candidate classes, senior 4, P7, were able to sit, and because of resilience and because of commitment and dedication, they were able to perform more than what we expected. Having said that, as far as the refugees is concerned, the Ministry of Education and Sports in 2018 came up with a comprehensive refugees response plan for host community and refugees. That was a comprehensive plan that aimed to provide quality education for the refugees and host community in an equitable manner, to be able for children to access the education, because education is a right and it is a shared responsibility. And yes, indeed, it is true that comprehensive plan was in position to see that our children in refugees and host community were able to come up and to be able to learn, but put in place the policy that government of Uganda has got for refugees that brought on board both the refugees and the host community together, which is first of its kind. And I think we appreciate that model of policy that has united the host community together. Moving forward, what are our plans? Where are we going? I think, as I said, the Ministry of Education has come up with a comprehensive COVID-19 response plan for the education sector. That is going to see safe and sustainable reopening of schools, both in refugees, host community, and country-wise. And we've got quite a number of pillars. Which pillars we want to see that we implement with every stakeholders in a sustainable manner, including surveillance of COVID-19 in schools and in all learning institutions. And of course, as we prepare to open the schools, we know that some of the things that we put in place is capacity building, refresher training for the teachers and the schools, psychosocial support in terms of bringing back the mental ability back to the environment of classrooms. And of course, a number of pillars that have been put in place, including bringing on board the senior management of the schools so that they participate in this reopening of school. So all in all, what I can say is that my ministry that is responsible for providing learning for the children, host community, and refugees has put in place a comprehensive package that will help children cope up once schools are open. And I want to call upon all stakeholders. Let's remember that education is a shared responsibility. We are also calling upon the parents in refugees and the host communities. Please take up your responsibility. Let's give the environment these children deserve for learning while at home. And even when schools open, let's take up our responsibility because it's a shared responsibility.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. You did bring in the aspect of digital means, how they were incorporated in the education plan to see that we saw some continuity in terms of getting access to education facilities. And I want to throw that to our chief guest, who's the Minister of ICT and National Guidance. From where you sit as you give us your remarks, what are some of the plans to ensure that refugees also have access to digital means? There's still the concern of some platforms are not easily accessible. What are your plans as a ministry to see that we achieve that?
So thank you very much, and I want to thank my colleagues for the informative remarks that they have made, and also appreciate the organizers of this discussion, because we are discussing a very important topic: education, emergencies, COVID-19, refugees, and this is very crucial. Number one, education is a right, and that's why even when you read our constitution and the attendant legislation that we have passed, we clearly bring it out that our children and all of us have a right to access education. And that speaks to some of the policies the government has been pushing, like universal primary education, universal secondary and post-primary education, learning at tertiary level and university level, where we give loans and so forth. And I think over time we have enabled Ugandans to access education at different levels. And education plays a very important role in our lives. I am sure all of us are seated on this panel because we went to school.
True.
If I imagine if I hadn't got an opportunity to go to school, I don't know even whether I would still be alive, or if I would be alive, where I would be. Maybe a rural person in Kanungu, I don't know doing what. And therefore all efforts should be put to ensure that human beings, if I can say that, access education, which education will transform their lives, but also transform our societies. And that's why I'm saying this topic is extremely very important. Now, we are challenged by the pandemic of COVID-19, which COVID-19 has disrupted the education calendar. In an attempt to manage this pandemic, Ugandans and actually the global population saw governments announcing lockdowns, closing schools, and this has brought a major disruption. And we call for the understanding of the population, because this is a new pandemic, and all of us have been grappling to see how do we manage it, and it has affected the education of our children, including the refugees. In the intervening period, we've been trying, as the Minister for Education has said, to ensure that the learners continue accessing education. But of course, when you look at the rural-urban differentials, maybe our children were not accessing some of these services at the same level. Those in Kampala and urban areas maybe can access television, radio, where some of the lessons were being channeled. Maybe those in Moyo, in Kanungu, grazing cattle and the goats, and they are out there not accessing it. So it has been a challenge, and we've been challenged now as a government, particularly as the ministry responsible for ICT, to see that when these disruptions occur, the learners should continue to get knowledge, to access learning services, so that this kind of major disruption does not occur. And to this end, we are now working on the issue of expanding connectivity, expanding the digital space, so that internet and broadband can be accessed all over the country, whether you are in southwestern Uganda or Western Nile or Karamoja. Our children and all of us should be able to access internet and e-services, so that you can do e-learning, you can do e-business, and that is where we are going. And COVID-19 has reminded us that we should, if we have been moving fast, we should now run to ensure that these services are available. Talking of refugees, Uganda has one of the most progressive refugee policies in the world, where our borders are always open. Even when we closed the borders during COVID-19, we said the borders remain open to refugees and people who are running away from stressful situations in their countries. Because Ugandans, by nature of what we are, we always receive people who are running towards us. And that's why Uganda has one of the highest numbers of refugees. And our policy, as spoken to earlier on, facilitates integrated delivery of services, where refugees study together with the children in the host communities. We share the same health facilities. We do not promote segregation. So the effects of COVID-19 on the host community children and learners was more or less the same as the refugees. In the ministry also, we are now promoting some specific interventions to ensure that in the refugee communities, they also have access to internet and the connectivity, so that they are not left behind, as the SDGs speak to that point. Going forward, we have already announced a plan to reopen schools, as the viewers know. Universities and tertiary institutions are going to open in November, which November is just next week. But we have tagged the opening, as we've been saying,
to vaccination.
To vaccination. One, to get a critical number, up to about 4.8 million Ugandans vaccinated, but also focusing on key populations, including the students, the teachers, and all those who work and live in the school environment, so that our children can be protected. And that is true for the host communities. It is also true for the refugee population. And therefore, our progressive policy of integration, of allowing the learners from the refugee communities mixing with our own children who are indigenous Ugandans, shall continue, because the SDGs clearly instruct us to leave no one behind. And therefore, this topic is extremely important, and I'm happy to be here. And as the chief guest, I now declare this conversation officially open. We continue to converse on this very important topic.
Thank you very much. Because if you had decided to not open it, we definitely wouldn't have carried on. So thank you so much for doing that, Honorable Minister for ICT and National Guidance. Thank you so much for those remarks. I do want to right now invite Mr. Patrick Kaboyo to once again set the pace even more for this discussion. Why are we having this dialogue? You're joining us online, Mr. Patrick Kaboyo, and I want to believe that you can see me clearly and also hear me. So over to you, Patrick Kaboyo. Why are we here today, and why are we discussing the role of host communities when we talk about refugees and of course the education sector?
Thank you so much, Sandra. And I want to welcome the honorable ministers that are in the house, the Honorable Chris Bariomusi and the Honorable Dr. Joyce Morika Duchu, our sector minister, for gracing this dialogue. We note that the Ministry of Education and Sports is under ongoing reform. There is reform at every sector. But of course, as non-state actors, we have a role to play in terms of contributing to the ongoing reform. And this is our maiden contribution to the Education Response Plan, so that all the issues we are discussing today and tomorrow inform contribution to the response plan. Honorable Minister, Chief Guest, and the Honorable Minister present from the sector, this dialogue continues today, and it will continue also tomorrow off the television with many partners that up-country and implementing different programs from accelerated learning programs, teacher capacity building, and also community engagement. And all this is supported by Oxfam Uganda. And at this point in time, allow me to make a stop, but thank the honorable ministers and all panelists present. Over to you, Sandra.
Thank you so much, Mr. Patrick Kaboyo. Your ability to keep time is very commendable. Do allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to invite yet another sponsor of this show, Mr. Edward Mwebaze, who's the country director of Oxfam Uganda. Would like to hear your remarks, and as we prepare to understand why we're here today for the next 30 minutes or so, help us understand why we're here. We're eager to hear what you have to say to us in your remarks. Over to you, Mr. Edward Mwebaze. You're joining us online.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Our chief guest, honorable ministers, government representatives, representatives from the UN who are present, partners, and all protocol observed, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Edward Mwebaze. I'm actually representing the country director of Oxfam, who is not available today. So I'm in an acting position, just to correct. We are very much honored to have all of you around on this virtual dialogue, and we look forward really to fruitful deliberations which will influence or actually contribute significantly to the development of education in our country. Oxfam is a global force, it's a global movement of actors who are looking for change that empowers people to be able to have a secure future that is just and free from poverty. And in Uganda, we work with a number of actors, both state and non-state actors, as well as private companies, academicians, and others, basically to fight extreme inequality. And if education is not going to be provided or is denied a certain group of people, then obviously we are contributing this extreme inequality in the countries, and we would want to avoid this. As we all know, before COVID-19, Uganda was already grappling with structural inequality across different sectors, even in health and education, and livelihoods. We would think this, of course, had also a great aid to the COVID impact. When the COVID came, obviously the inequalities were deepened across different groups, but most especially those who are in crisis situations. Education should be an equalizer, and if it has, in our case, it has greatly been impacted for both refugees and mainstream learners across the country. The government has put in an effort, and we want to appreciate what the government has done. It has been able to do something to ensure continuity in education, to ensure learning continues amidst the pandemic. However, these measures have not benefited all the children. And of course, some previous speakers have already hinted to this. Lack of access to facilities like television, like radio, internet, leave alone those who can access may also not have enough money to replenish that and other requirements. I know that some rural areas, even if they have access to some of the facilities, they are not likely to be able to provide for, especially people like the girl children. In the rural areas, when the girl children are out, obviously, even in urban, I guess, they are looked at as products for wealth. So this has been a big issue as children go out of school or are unable to continue with the education, the majority of them are going for early marriages. In the last week or in the last 2 weeks, we've been in the north, in some parts of the north, and communities reported very high numbers of pregnancies among children in schools, both for refugees and also for the host communities. Just because the girls and of course the boys are not doing anything, they are only seen as sources of labor, but also as marriage material for the girls. And we want to avoid this. But there has been a feeling that, for example, the parents should have responsibility, they take care of the children, but there is a point at which they may be unable to do this because the parents are also fending for themselves. So it's a responsibility of the parents, but it's also a responsibility of the government as well to ensure that we protect these children together. The children of Uganda should never, we should never have this, the fate of our young generation. The young generation should not be exposed to this. We as people who are still in this community, let's look at how best we can work within the context, together with the government, to provide for these children's education. Education is a human right. And if it's a right, therefore government has the responsibility to protect, promote, and fulfill the obligations pertaining to the right to education, and provide for it in ways that are non-discriminatory, but also cover people who are also in crisis situations. Yeah. It is particularly critical to ensure that the
Mr.
education...
Edward Mwebase, I would like to... Mr. Edward Mwebase, I would like to sadly cut you short over there in your remarks, but we should be able to invite you once again to carry on. But as an aspect of time, would want to dive right away into the conversations. And I want to, before we get into the panel discussions, I would like to go in for a short break. But just to remind Mr. Joseph Kajumba, who is the focal point officer, conflict and disaster risk management at the Ministry of Education and Sports, you should be getting ready to help us understand the key priorities that you have considered to inform the new education response plan for refugees, of course. We'll now take a short break, but we'll be back on the show.
Get 1 month of DSTV Premium Movies with Ad Movies. You can now add premium movie channels to your entertainment, no matter your package. Dial *206# or use the My DSTV app and add Mnet 1 and 2 if you are on Compact Plus, or Mnet 1, 2 and 3 if you are on Compact, Family and Access at only 25k. Gatako Movies today with DSTV Uganda. It's your moment. DSTV Uganda is regulated by UCC. T's and C's apply.
Are you ready for what's coming? We are getting bigger and stronger. We know what you need, and we're letting you know we've got you. Get ready to eat life with an even bigger spoon. It's convenient and accessible. It's different and exciting. It's the digital revolution. Nation Media Group Uganda. Media of Africa for Africa.
Down in it, say boom, boom, pow, boom, boom, pow. Or swallow me no kunya, big on the downy, or nakuluna, kumango is angry, nangan, punya bulunji. Catching me no kubera, fresh and quest of downies. Boom, boom, pow, boom, boom, pow. Or soup on dance and bukaba, ne boom, boom, pow. Or what downy, boom, boom, pow.
Wafunire akasaketi ka downy ku siringi 5 zokka.
Want a kick-ass game? Have a good night's sleep.
Get brand new Always Dreams with a wider back and lead guard channels that lock liquid no matter how you move.
A good night's rest, a kick-ass game.
Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us. Once again, the theme this evening is education in emergency amidst COVID-19. We want to understand the role of host communities in fostering resilience, diversity and coexistence for better learning outcomes for refugees. Earlier, we did hear from our chief guest and also our Honorable Minister, and right now we want to dive right away into a panel discussion. We want to invite Ms. Juliet Namudu Nambi, who's the Director of Education and Social Services at KCCA. We want to immediately understand how many refugee-going learners do we have in the capital here in the city, and what are those plans to see that they access different education facilities that we have. And later we will be inviting Mr. Benedict Lokiru, who is the Building Resilience in Conflict Context through Education, and he is the project manager at Oxfam. I want to believe that we can get Mr. Benedict Lokiru, who will help us understand what the BREEZE project has so far contributed in terms of learning continuity for the refugee learners. Over to you, Mr. Benedict Lokiru. I'm aware that you are online, and I want to believe that we can get you and of course see you and hear you loud and clear. Over to you, Mr. Benedict Lokiru. In the meantime, Ms. Juliet Namudu Nambi, please do prepare. We want to understand how many refugees do we have in the capital here in Kampala, and just how much is the KCCA planning, and what are the plans that KCCA is putting in place to see that they too access education facilities. So over to you, Mr. Benedict Lokiru. I want to believe we can get you right away. Sadly, we can't get Mr. Benedict Lokiru, but allow me invite Mr. Joseph Kajumba, who is the focal point officer, conflict and disaster risk management at the Ministry of Education and Sports. He is also representing the Director Basic and Secondary Education, Mr. Ismail Mulindwa. We want to hear from you. What are the key priorities that you have considered to inform the new education response plan for the refugees in this country? Over to you.
Thank you so much. The moderators,
Clearly, we hope you can adjust where you're seated, the position you're in. Maybe we'll be able to see you clearly and also hear you. But if we are not able to hear from Mr. Joseph Kajumba, do allow me to pass this question to the guest. You know, when you're present in the studio, you have a big advantage. Depends on how you look at it, to speak more and also represent the others that we're not able to get online. Let us hear from you about what are the biggest plans that you think right now we should be concentrating on to see that the issue of refugees not accessing proper education facilities is addressed.
Thank you once again. I think that's the gist of the matter. I want to thank my honorable ministers. They gave very good insights into what government has been planning for reopening of schools, including refugees. And I think my brother Kajumba was going to give you a highlight of very many issues we presented to Ministry of Education and Education Response Plan Secretariat to include in Education Response Plan 2, because we've just finished Education Response Plan 1, which expired I think a month ago. Yes, now we are going into Education Response Plan 2. So it's a continuation. A lot has been achieved, but maybe what I'm going to give is our prayer that if we can add on what we have achieved, then it can be better for our refugees. First of all, the biggest number of refugees the chief guest talked about, Honorable Minister, now we are around 1.52 million refugees in Uganda. But the biggest population are children, and most of them school-going children. So if you have that big number of children, it calls a lot. It calls for a lot, and of course within the host community, most especially in terms of infrastructure development. We agreed that we are using integrated system. These are schools that were started for a very small population in a certain host community. Now there is emergence. You get thousands of children going to the same school. We have some schools in northern Uganda which got 3,000 in one school. That calls for a lot of investment in terms of infrastructure development. And I think to meet the standard of the classroom ratio, and we think that in our Education Response Plan 2, that should be an area to emphasize, to support the efforts of government to increase on the number of classrooms.
The government has been working really tirelessly to see that a majority of the students and teachers get vaccinated. When we speak about refugees, is that something you would say in the office of the Prime Minister you're prioritizing to see that refugees to access vaccines so that they're able to return to school?
Absolutely, that's the plan for the country. And as the Honorable Minister said, nobody is going to be left behind. If we are vaccinating children, whether they are refugees or nationals, it will be cutting across. So it's the same program. Schools will open at the same time. You will not say the nationals are opening schools and refugees are not opening. No, it's the same. The program is the same.
So do allow me to invite Ms. Juliet Namudu Nambi, who's the Director Education and Social Services at KCCA. Like I had earlier mentioned, we would want to have a clear understanding of about how many refugees do we have here in the capital, and also what educational and social service issues is your department registering in dealing with refugees here in the capital. Over to you, Ms. Namudu.
Thank you very much. Greetings to the honorable ministers who are present in this discussion. I'm glad to be sharing some information about the issue of refugees in Kampala. We have about 20,000 children who attend school, and in Kampala, in almost all the 79 government-aided schools, but of course definitely in the private schools as well. When the children come to school, the beauty is that they join other children from the community, and together they're able to settle in, fit in, and have a good time while in school. As KCCA and through the schools, we try to make sure that we prepare a very good conducive learning environment for these children, because we all are aware that when children are coming in as refugees, they come in with different challenges. They're definitely traumatized. They definitely have language barriers, because many of these children come from South Sudan. They come from the DRC Congo, and they need to fit in with the rest of the learners in the schools. So the teachers, in partnership with the Ministry of Education and Sports and in partnership with other private partners like NRC, we work towards making sure that the teachers know how to work with these children who are coming into the schools from other parts of the world, or of the continent. So through lots of training that we have done over the years, the teachers are able to work with these children regardless of the language barriers, to fit into the age groups that they belong to, and to be able to study and to cope with the teaching and learning that is going on. The beauty about the schools in Kampala, and I will focus more on the 79 government-aided schools, is that whatever it is that is in the schools for the rest of the children is utilized by the refugee children, whether it is the toilet facilities, the school environment, the textbooks, all the learning materials are utilized. And when partners come on board and support us further in improving the lives of the refugee children by paying their monies for meals and other scholastic materials, or providing resources into the schools, both the children from the refugee communities and the children from the community itself share these facilities, and that enables all of them to benefit. So during the period of COVID-19, even when the candidates returned to schools, and the rest of the classes that were allowed to come in came back, these children were able to work very closely with their teachers and to perform as best as they could at the end of the cycles while in school.
To hear from you, we know that refugees usually come from very harsh communities, and they are sort of really usually running away from something. As KCCA here, looking at the refugees within the capital, what are some of the social services, once again, are you putting in place to see that, yes, you're taking them to school, but you're catering to that extra aspect that will enable them to receive what they get at school?
Some of the things that are definitely done by KCCA are health facilities. All the refugee communities can access the health centers. And like I've said, they access the schools. They're able to use all the rest of the facilities that we have in KCCA. But definitely health is very, very important because many of these children come when they're traumatized. In addition to the health centers, the partners that we have, most especially currently NRC, the Norwegian Refugee Council, also provides the support in terms of managing the trauma that has been experienced by the children and their parents, and to help make sure that they fit in and are comfortable and can continue to be in school. Very, very important of all as well is that the teachers learn how to work with these children, because the children or the learners spend a lot of time in school, and the teachers become their caregivers and support systems. The other children as well are their support systems in school. So during this time in school and out of school, all this support is enabling these learners to be comfortable together with their parents and to fit in and live a good life and study well.
Is the missing gap. You know, today we're talking about host communities as well, and the aspect of refugees. Where would you say the missing gap is, and what strategies can we put in place to ensure that we, you know, narrow this gap? Because if you're to move around the capital, we still see some refugees on the streets, you know, and we can testify to that, right? So what are those gaps that you're currently seeing, and how do we address them?
I know for sure that there are very many refugees on the streets, and one of the directorates in KCCA that is really linked in regards to helping the refugees on the streets, for example, is the Directorate of Gender. They too are working closely with the Ministry of Gender to support all those other refugees that may not necessarily go through the formal processes of being identified, being placed, being housed, being taken to school, to fit in, because it's very true, not all the refugees who are in this city are actually in the schools or being supported by KCCA. So I would look at that as one of the gaps that we really need to bridge. Who are these refugees if they are not accounted for in the systems that we work with? Once we can bridge that gap, then we'll definitely be sure that all the refugees are accounted for, their children are in school, and they can actually have a good education, because the universal primary education is there for all these children who cannot necessarily go to the private schools where they have to pay large sums of fees.
Who's the Director, Education and Social Services at KCCA. You did bring in some of the gaps that we should really be reflecting on to, of course, deal with. Allow me invite Mr. Joseph Kajumba, who's the Focal Point Officer, Conflict and Disaster Risk Management at the Ministry of Education and Sports. And we know that you're representing the Director, Basic and Secondary Education, Mr. Ismail Malindwa. And we want to hear from you really, what are the key priorities that you have considered to inform the new education response plan? Over to you, Mr. Joseph Kajumba.
Really,
Can't hear you. We still can't seem to really get you clearly. Maybe you just need to check your connection so that we get really the key priorities that you have considered to inform the new education response plan. But for you who's really watching us this evening, we ask that you share with us your thoughts. Are you in a community that hosts refugees? What are some of those issues that you feel we should be really addressing to see that they too can access education facilities without affecting the host communities? I do want to believe that we can at least get Mr. Benedict Lokiru, who is from BRIS, and he is the BRIS project manager at Oxfam, Uganda. We want to understand how is the BRIES project contributing in terms of learning facilities for the refugees. Mr. Benedict Lokiru, I know you're online. I hope we can get you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And protocol observed. Yeah, I'm sorry, I could not get the question very well because there was. I'm sorry. I think somebody should mute. I can't understand properly. Could not. Yes, Kajumba, can you mute? Yeah, in terms of Oxfam, I can give a brief of what Oxfam does in terms of education in emergencies. The current project we are running supports education of refugees at Balabek Refugee Settlement, Lamo District. We implement accelerated education for children coming from the South Sudanese refugee community and together with the host communities. So we support them with cash-up programs. You recall that some of these children, when they come from South Sudan, they have been studying in Arabic. So when they enter in Uganda, we first give them cash-up programs to catch up with English in order to be able to join in classes. So accelerated education, as we all know, is a compact kind of education where learners who have missed years of education due to conflict are able to catch up. For example, if you missed in P1 or P2, we give a compact curriculum that is equivalent to P3, because of age, someone should have been in P3. So far, we have supported over 700 children, refugee children, and host community children, and some of them have actually registered for primary living examination in 2019, 2020, and they have got the results. Some of them passed to the secondary level of education. But of course, we all know that COVID brought a lot of challenges, but all the same, we tried with the government, with the guidelines of government, we try to catch up with supporting them in terms of learning. We created what we call block learning, group learning. We are supporting them at block level. The teachers go and support them under trees, sometimes under rocks, in groups of 5, 10, given that that area of Palabek, even in terms of internet connectivity, things are not easy. So that's how we support them. We support teachers with bicycles to move around, and then we distribute the materials that the government has already distributed to the district education offices. We support to make sure that we escalate the materials to the children. Well, what's of course challenging now is teenage pregnancies. We know teenage pregnancies is very high. Most of these children have got pregnant, but the question is, how are we preparing ourselves as schools are opening in January? Some of these children will have to come with kids. So we need changing rooms. We need rooms where some of these mothers will have to tender care the children. So that means schools have to get prepared to have extra rooms that can support these children if we need them to come back to school with their children. And that's the ultimate. We cannot allow them, their future, to get ruined because they just got pregnant. So as stakeholders, we need to prepare very seriously about the opening of schools in January. Thank you.
We do have the Honorable Minister in charge of primary education. I believe she has noted that down, the aspect of teenage pregnancy among the refugees. How are we preparing them to actually return to school? It is something that we have to consider. Allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to invite Mr. Joseph Kajumba, who's the focal point officer, conflict and disaster risk management at the Ministry of Education and Sports. And I do want to ask those that are joining us online, please mute your microphone because it does interfere with those speaking. If you know you're not speaking, please do mute your microphone. Over to you, Joseph Kajumba.
Thank you so much. Once again, I hope this time it's fine. Our honorable ministers in the studios and the moderator, thank you so much. A very quick background on the ERIP, the development of the Education Response Plan. It was done in 2018 by the First Lady and Minister of Education and Sports. And it was based on 3 outputs. 1, on improved access to relevant learning opportunities. 2, it was supposed to improve delivery of quality of education and training. And 3, to strengthen the system for effective delivery. 1.5 years, actually 1.5 to 2 years down the road, achievements have been made very, very significantly. constructions have been done of infrastructure, classrooms, teachers' houses, toilets, and other facilities. And we've seen an increase in the enrollment for primary from 66 to 70%. And secondary, though dismal, from 11 to 13%. And there have been learning spaces that have been created for the young learners. Now, where do we want to go? We foresee during the ERP2 further expansion of the ECD to ensure ECD facilities to ensure that these young learners can now access education facilities in earnest. Something also new to this ERP, which we are going to have embedded in, is the skills development. In the different assessments that have been done by various organizations and even the ministry, it has been realized that the skills, the refugees and host communities do desire skills, and this is something that has been embedded and it's been planned for in the ERP2. We intend to have inclusive education also within this new coming ERP, which will enable all those learners with special needs and other special groups to get on board and be able to access education. Further to what we saw in ERP1, increasing enrollment, there are going to be a lot of efforts, and there are still a lot of efforts to ensure that the enrollment of the refugees is enhanced from the figures I've already highlighted. We're also going to have a number, we're going to ensure that the number of refugees accessing the different services that are associated with education is greatly increased. And we also need to highlight that under this new ERP, there will be a continuous efforts to ensure that relevant learning opportunities are availed, and by construction of additional classrooms, recruitment of teachers, expansion of the existing facilities, and also, ensuring that access to secondary education, something which has not been so much initially, which wasn't heavily invested in ERP1, it's something which is also being looked at as a possibility. So broadly, there will be one expansion of the existing facilities, but also the creation of a few new areas according to the gaps that have been identified. But truly, these gaps are still many, they are still glaring. The initial investment from the ERP was $384 million US. Right now, I think significant progress has been made. There is a need for additional support in that area, and partners working together with the government to ensure that additional resources are being sought, to ensure that these gaps are being covered, so that the objectives and the outputs can be fulfilled.
Joseph Kajumba, I do want to once again invite Mr. Edward Mwebaze. I know we did cut you short in your conversation. I just want to give you, say, a minute to give us more of your remarks as we almost come to the end of this show. Over to you, Mr. Edward Mwebaze. We do ask you to unmute your microphone so that we can hear you. As we prepare for Mr. Edward Mwebaze to unmute his microphone so that we can hear him loud and clear. He is the Country Director, Oxfam Uganda. Over to you as you give us your very last remarks as we come to the end of this conversation this evening.
Okay, thank you very much, Sandra. Just to say that there must be deliberate efforts to ensure that offline school packages are given to those who are in very remote locations or those who cannot access internet. But even, of course, we know that in the long run, the interest is to continue the issue of distance learning and teaching and learning, and therefore connectivity in areas which cannot, which are not able to access the internet, is also recommended. But we ask the government, for the education and emergency provision to be included in the budget, so that at least this. I can see most of the current interventions are mainly funded by humanitarian actors, or education emergency interventions. So we would encourage the government to really also make a specific, deliberate statement by planning for this intervention, and that's one of the. I believe that the discussions, of course, going on will identify more and more practical actions, but we would really want to see deliberate efforts on the part of government, and of course on all of us, the actors. I do appreciate the efforts and commitment of the different stakeholders, government, the EU, which is funding some of these interventions, as well as our partners, EWAD, that's Education Advocacy with a Difference, who have organized this event, and of course, our all development partners who continue to contribute to the narratives on the table. So through the BRICE project, which is BRICE Education for Life, Oxfam is committed to ensuring quality, sustainable and resilient education opportunities for refugees in northern Uganda, but also, of course, through that to the host communities as well. The project also is focusing on raising professional competences of teachers through continuous teacher training and supervision, and would like to see this continue. So thank you very much, and you're welcome to the dialogue. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Edward Mwebeze, who is representing the country director of Oxfam Uganda. I did mention that BRICE Uganda is actually one of the sponsors of this show. They've made it possible, and we do appreciate you for making sure that we're here to have this dialogue that will carry on into tomorrow. But just to remind you, the theme we've been focusing on education in emergency amidst COVID-19. We wanted to understand the role of host communities in fostering resilience, diversity, and coexistence for better learning outcomes for refugees. And at this very moment, I do want to invite Mr. Byarhanga Godfrey just to pick your thoughts again. You did point a little bit on the host community issue, but just how much do you think the refugees being present in the host communities affects them, and how should we prepare both sides so that they can coexist together?
Thank you so much. I think I talked about the pressure. The big numbers come into the communities. If you had planned for a school, let's say for 1,000 people, and you get an emergency, 2,000 people are added on that school, you know the pressure. So the communities, the host communities actually are going through a lot. But the good news is that we've advocated for peaceful coexistence.
You see, when you say they are going through a lot, we just want to understand exactly. You are a senior field coordinator. Just paint for us a picture on some of the issues that are at hand that you think we should target.
Specifically, when you go into education, I talked about the pressure on classroom. There is a pressure on teachers. Of course, the teacher-pupil ratio, I think the standard should be 1 to 55. But in refugee areas, we even go to 131 before the closure of schools, and that was too much. And you can't avoid that, most especially in emergencies. So those are some of the areas we need to talk about. The other issue that really comes with the refugees within the host communities is the issue of languages. I think one of our colleagues talked about it. For example, in lower classes where you are supposed to use thematic curriculum, and you have now these children from different countries speaking different languages. Which mother language are you going to use in that lower class? Those are challenges that the host community will go through, and the resilient teachers also try. Others have even gone to get the assistant teachers who can understand those languages from within the refugee communities. But that is an inconvenience to the host community. So there are many issues. I think if we have more time, we need to come and highlight what the host communities go through. But also that comes with also an advantage of these refugees, not only with challenges, because some of these refugees, some of them are already skilled, and some host communities are also picking from these skills. Let us not look only at primary, at secondary, but there are those who have gone into skilling, into technical and vocational, and there is a lot of exchange of knowledge. So the inclusion approach, the education, refugee education into national system, I think is solving most of these problems. Having the same environment, and these days the districts actually are now planning even for the refugees the same. And I think the response plan 2, as Mr. Kajumba highlighted, will get some of these issues sorted out. Our biggest challenge was funding, but most partners are now coming on board to support the efforts of government, because I think we had a deficit of some very good money with the education response 1. We hope this time around our partners come with some resources so that we don't see the education response on paper, but we see it in action.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, we shall find that the whole burden is being shifted to government. The government is already stretched, so we shall appeal to our international colleagues with a mandate also to intervene in refugee matters, to come and support these good responses and add on the efforts of government.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Godfrey Vyarhanga, who is the Senior Field Coordinator, Department of Refugees in the Office of the Prime Minister. I do want to once again invite Ms. Juliet Namudu Nambi, who's the Director, Education and Social Services at KCCA. In our prior conversation, in your submission, you did mention that there are refugees. You did admit that we still see refugees on the streets in the capital, and sometimes we do not know where they're coming from. We want to understand from you, what are your plans on ground to see that you trace where the refugees are coming from and find the appropriate help to give them so that they are properly incorporated into the school setup? Kindly unmute your microphone so that we can hear you.
Yes, I said I beg your pardon. Could you just repeat the question?
We would like to understand, in your prior submission, you did admit that we can all still see some refugees on the streets in the capital, and sometimes we do not know where these refugees are. And we want to understand, as we come to the end of this conversation, what your plans are to see that you understand where they're coming from and what help they need in order to fit in a proper school setup.
Oh, thank you very much. Like I earlier indicated, the Directorate of Gender is helping us greatly to identify these children. During the lockdown, actually, the Directorate withdrew or removed the children who were on the streets, and they were accommodated in one of our schools, Nachivubo Blue Primary School. They were supported in different ways and actually taken for training and skilling. And those are some of the measures that we are trying to use to make sure that we have these children off the streets, and either if they're much older are able to acquire skills, and if they're still young, they can join school and be able to study. We are able to do this definitely through different partnerships and different groups that come in to help us. I also wanted you to allow me to say something about special needs, if you don't mind, because one of our colleagues talked about it, and it's also coming through very much when the children from refugee communities come to join the children in the schools in Kampala. Would I say something about that? Can I say something about that?
Please carry on, Ms. Juliet Namudu.
Thank you. We recently, a few years ago, were able to put back or set back the assessment center that had initially been started by the Ministry of Education and Sports through partners like Crane and Cheshire, and we have professionals who come from Butabika, who come from Chambogo and different other places, who come in there and assess our children, both the children in the mainstream schools or education, but also the refugees. And this assessment center has enabled us greatly to identify beyond trauma, the children, refugee children, challenges that they may have and the support that they need, whether it's medical, whether it's academic, and to enable the schools to work with them very well. So I just wanted to make a comment about that the assessment center is really bringing good results, yielding good results to the level of even the final exams that the students attend, PLE, UCE, and USCE. Thank you.
Thank you so much. She brings in the aspect of special needs children in the refugee camps. That is something that I think moving on, we have to discuss how to cater for their needs as much as we do for the host communities. But at this very point, allow me invite once again Mr. Patrick Kaboyo, who's the technical advisor at the Education Advocacy Network. Once again, we do appreciate you for organizing this event and making sure that this dialogue actually happens. Over to you, Mr. Patrick Kaboyo. What are your closing remarks as we almost come to the end of the show?
Thank you, Sandra, the Honorable Minister, Dr. Chris, the Chief Guest, and our Sector Minister, Dr. Kaduchu. The difference we want to bring with this dialogue is to ensure that we fully participate in the reform at all levels. Contributing to the education response plan is one, but we also know that there is a digital agenda framework for education that the Minister for ICT and our senior minister ought to work together, bringing us closely. And the difference again we bring is that we cannot keep confronting, backstabbing, sour graping, but have to embrace government programs, support each other in the spirit of partnership, as it is very clear in the Sustainable Development Goal 17. And we have to participate in nation building to ensure that our country is moving forward. That is the remark I have to make, and thank the Office of the Prime Minister for supporting this dialogue, and Oxfam Uganda for supporting whatever discussions we are having going forward.
Fully participation in the reforms, support each other in the spirit of partnerships, the remarks of Mr. Patrick Kaboyo. Now, Honorable Ministers, we've heard the remarks, we've seen the missing gaps that we need to address, the aspect of special needs children within the refugee camps, the aspect of digital platforms, they need to be accessed as well. We've also had the missing gaps in terms of just how many refugees do we know and how best do we help them. I want to move this conversation to you, Honorable Minister Dr. Joyce Omoriku Kaduchu, the State Minister in charge of primary education. As we come to the end of this conversation, what are your closing remarks and what is the way forward?
Thank you so much. I just want to appreciate each and everybody who has contributed significantly to this discussion. And I say this has come timely as we plan to reopen the school in a safe and sustainable manner. Now, one, what is the way forward in terms of coming up with a response plan for education for both refugees and host community? We've got the immediate term response, we have the medium term, and a long-term solution. The long-term solutions is what my colleagues have been talking about: construction, making more classrooms, probably expanding the classroom building and many other structures. But in the meantime, what is the short-term solution as we plan to reopen the schools and the response plan for the host and the refugees community? One, we are looking at bringing on board the double shift method, because the population in the refugees community, the children are quite huge. As my colleagues have said, there are quite many in a class. So we want to bring on board, have one group come in the morning, one group in the afternoon, and keeping the COVID standard in place, because we need to social distance, we need to keep these children apart. So this is one of the methods that we are going to deploy in the refugees and the host communities too. We want to, of course, the curriculum has been revised. This revised curriculum will be conducted across board in the whole country, including refugees and the host community. And the education cycle will have to fit in line with the revised curriculum. That means the content of the curriculum, as we plan to deliver, there's going to be remedial teaching, catch-up teaching. Some of the children might have not catch up within the time of home learning studies. Some of the studies which they have been doing online, they might have not been together with the rest. So that remedial teaching has to go extra mile, meaning other days like Saturday or so, if planned well, we need to utilize it properly because we've lost a lot of time. Number three, we want to ensure that no child is left behind, meaning that the progressive assessment will take into consideration children will be promoted to the next class without repeating a year, meaning that like the younger ones from 6 years, we should be able, both refugees and host community should be able to get into P1. So that is basically the plan that we're going to have immediate, and there's going to be the midterm and the long-term plan. So I want to assure our viewers and the entire people of Uganda that the Ministry of Education, that is spearheaded by the First Lady and the Ministry of Education and Sport, has really put in place a comprehensive approach for both host and the refugees, including the special needs children. We have these facilities in it cut across. As we said that Uganda has embraced the integrated approach where both refugees and host community, special need, and those which are able are integrated. So this cut across. Now, there is the issue that has been raised by our colleagues that yes, the issue of teenage pregnancy, that we may not finish the discussions now, but what I want to say is that the Education Ministry once again has come up with a policy that can allow our girls to come back to the classroom once they have delivered. And this had happened during the PLE, during USE, during USCE. Girls have been, those who have delivered came back and sat the examination. Others which are pregnant even were allowed to sit now. This time round, we are thinking that the police has allowed them to come back. But the children, the babies, we need the parents to take full responsibility. And we have put in place, together with the partners, UNICEF, UNFPA, and all the partners, a one-year campaign for preventing teenage pregnancy, managing and post-teenage pregnancy, including involving our parents to look after those babies and allow the girls come back to school. So the issue of saying that we need to improvise another classroom, another facility for babies and the carers, I think we are going extra mile. So the most important thing is to involve the parents, because education is a shared collective responsibility. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. Do allow me now to invite our chief guest, Honorable Chris Baryomunsi, who is the Minister of ICT and National Guidance. As we conclude this conversation, what are some of the ICT innovations that you're currently planning once again for the refugees and host communities as we conclude this conversation?
Thank you very much. As I specifically answer that question, let me thank all the participants, the panelists, the supporters and sponsors of this show, and my colleagues who are here physically with me for the very informative discussion that we have had. And we have taken note of the suggestions and recommendations from all of you panelists, and as a government, we shall definitely put them into consideration as we propose reforms, as we review the policies, the legislations, and all the interventions that we continue to put in place. Just my parting shots. One, refugees are part of us. They are human beings, and all of us can be refugees at any time. And therefore, I thank Ugandans who have continued to host refugees who come from different parts of this globe. Although sometimes we get complaints from host communities that we give more preference to refugees to the detriment of the local host communities. But let us coexist. But we have done well as a country in terms of accommodating and living together with refugees. Let's continue like that, and we should be able to give a comfortable environment to refugees once they are here. Secondly, COVID-19 is real. Let's continue to observe the SOPs and let us vaccinate if the opportunity comes. But COVID-19 has also come with its own challenges, like the new epidemic of teenage pregnancies. And what this one has shown us is that the school system has been able to protect our young children, especially young girls. But now when the learners, the girls went home, our home system seems not to be protecting our girls adequately. Our policy is that girls who get pregnant at that age and in school should be facilitated to get back to school. If it requires the girl to change the school because of stigma and shame, the parents and the teaching system should support that girl to continue with the education system and let the babies be looked after. And we call upon parents to understand this situation. Don't ostracize your daughter, don't chase your daughter simply because she became pregnant. Lastly, government is committed to ensuring that all Ugandans and all those who live in Uganda continue with the education once we reopen the institutions, including refugees, including persons with disability in refugee settlements, but also in the general community. We want to ensure that our learners can catch up and continue with education. In the Ministry of ICT, like I said earlier on, we are embarking on programs to extend connectivity. We've been laying the national backbone infrastructure, and we are now in advanced stages of bringing a new project now to do the last mile connections, so that all parts of the country can be connected, and there will be a special component for refugee settlements, so that we have internet which should not only be accessible but also should be affordable. We are working on bringing down the cost of internet, because COVID-19 has taught us that situations can occur when our learners are not in the physical class. They are at home, but learning and teaching can continue. And therefore, there are lots of programs which we are now championing in the government, and I agree that we should work with everybody, civil society, the non-state actors, and all of us should work as partners to see that all these reforms, all these interventions, we deliver them together in order for us to continue to improve the quality of life of Ugandans. I thank you very much, and thank you for moderating very well.
Thank you so much, Chief Guest Honorable Chris Baryomunsi, who's the Minister of ICT and National Guidance. Right after the Chief Guest really speaks, it's important that you do not speak a lot. But he mentioned something about all of us being refugees. At one point, you can become a refugee. So just imagine yourself treating the same refugee within your community the way you'd want to be treated if you found yourself in that community. A big thank you to all the Oxfam Breeze partners, the government of Uganda, the refugees, for all making this show and dialogue possible. But remember, let us not keep this conversation in the conference rooms, in the boardrooms. Let us carry them and actually put all our commitments into action. I've been your moderator, Sandra Twin.